Welcome to the Cook the Books podcast by T, the president and publisher of Tea with Coffee Media.
And I'm Kelsey and Lovelady, the vice president of marketing.
Back in 2021, we took our experience as independent authors and used it to create a publishing company with our friends. Our mission is to help other indie authors reach more and greater success.
This podcast is dedicated to helping authors find the perfect recipe to create their books and their persona as an author. We talk about everything from plotting to character creation to marketing to using your life experiences to create your unique voice and stories.
Welcome to the show. And cut.
Nice.
Okay. Welcome back to the Cook the Books podcast. You are here for the second episode, and if you tuned into the first episode and you're back, we're glad you enjoyed it enough to come back. Kelsey and Lovelady is the vice president of marketing at Tea with Coffee Media. I am Tyler Wittkofsky, the publisher and president at Tea with Coffee Media. And Kelsey, I see that you're enjoying a Frosty and fries. You know, that is one of Gracie's favorite meals, is dipping her fries into a Frosty.
I see. Here's the thing. In my younger days, I always preferred vanilla milkshake and fries rather than chocolate Frosty and fries, but I get it now.
Yeah. And then of course DoorDash always forgets the Frosty, and our locals Wendy's is terrible about that. So if we want a Frosty and fries, we have to actually go there and make sure they don't forget our Frosty. It's terrible. Terrible.
I don't understand. We live in the 21st century.
You should be able to get me a Frosty
to my door without a problem.
Exactly. So how are you doing since the last episode?
I'm doing pretty well. We were told that we were going to get anywhere from like 6 to 10 inches of snow and high wind warnings in the next, 24 hours. Now it's starting to look like it's only 2 inches of snow. But if there's one thing that I've learned from living in the Rocky Mountains, it's that any one of those options is a possibility. And don't assume that it's not going to be bad until you know for a fact it's not going to be bad.
Yeah, I get that. Unfortunately, we have to worry about hurricanes here on the coast and not snowstorms. I would much rather have some snow than a bunch of rain and wind for 2 or 3 days straight. 60 plus mile per hour winds.
One thing I can say is our power plants and like electrical plants are actually built to withstand the weather, unlike Texas.
Nice. Yeah. Texas, you heard that. Sorry, Victoria. So today we are going to jump into our hot topic issue. You want to tell our listeners about what we're going to be discussing about our hot topic?
Yes, we are going to be talking about an issue involving one author, Piper CJ, which if you're on Book Talk, you've heard the name, and you probably know a cursory glance of what's been going on with that. It's primarily the focus of authors engaging with their reviewers, specifically people who leave negative reviews on their books, and whether or not it's appropriate.
Yeah, so, it's funny because whenever I first started writing, my first book, Not Alone, got great reviews throughout the entire time. But whenever I published my poetry collection, and, poetry is a finicky subject anyways. People either love it or they hate it, and they have certain styles that they love and certain styles that they hate. And so I got my first 1-star review on Goodreads on my poetry collection, Coffee, Alcohol, and Heartbreak. I was devastated. I mean, like, I saw it whenever I was at work and my heart dropped. I was not productive the rest of the day. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago, so I've definitely grown a lot. But I eventually, and what stung the most was it was just a 1-star rating. It wasn't even a review. So I couldn't use that to help myself become a better writer, because a lot of people say don't rely on reviews to be a better writer, but ultimately reviews are there for other readers, yes, but they also help writers develop and become better whenever you get actual constructive criticism and feedback from the readers. Well, me being the young writer that I was, I reached out to the Goodreads profile that left me a 1-star review. And I simply said, "Hey, I'm the author of this book. I'm just curious why you gave me 1 star, um, so that I can improve my writing." Person never messaged me back, thankfully, because that would have probably just led to a whole slew of issues by itself. They probably ignored me because they knew I was an indie author at the time. And, but as I grew and I got older and got more experienced in the writing industry and the writing world, I realized, like I said, yes, you can use these reviews to grow as a writer, but those reviews are more for readers. And you can't force, just like you can't force somebody to write you a review, you can't force somebody to give you a 5-star rating or a 5-star review. And you can't bully somebody into doing that. And that's kind of what Piper's fans were doing, though, is they were
Yeah.
trying to bully people into submission. And that brings up a whole, what is your stance on the reviews? How should an author interact with reviews and reviewers?
So my personal opinion is don't interact at all. Unless you're specifically looking for ARC reviewers to leave reviews for your book when it first comes out, do not engage. And I'm of that mind for 2 reasons. Number one, you made the argument that reviews are helpful for the author for constructive criticism on how to improve. The thing is, authors get that information during the writing process of the book with the beta readers and the ARC reactors and the editors. That's when they're supposed to get their constructive criticism back. Book reviews are for other readers to know this is what you're getting into. These are the trigger warnings that are connected to this book, whether or not I personally enjoyed it, and therefore do I think other people like me, would they enjoy it or not? So number one, the reason why I think authors should not engage with reviewers, positive or negative, is simply because the book reviews are not for the authors. They are for the other readers. My second issue is if you have a difficult time handling negative reviews, you're just hurting yourself by engaging with the reviews and the reviewers. A lot of people say that if you don't have thick skin, you shouldn't be a writer because not everybody is going to love your book. And that is true. You cannot please everybody. And you are not going to be everything to everyone. I do, however, argue that just because a review might upset you, you shouldn't be an author. I have a problem with that from the standpoint of I have rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is very common with people with autism, ADHD, and other forms of neurodivergence. And what rejection sensitive dysphoria is exactly what the title says. I take rejection harder than a lot of people do, and I see rejection where rejection is not intended. That doesn't mean that I can't be a good writer. What it means is that things will upset me if I see a review. What I do with that information is fully within my control. I know not to look at negative reviews or reviews in general. I have you and everybody else in the company send me positive reviews so that I know what people are saying, and so that I know, as the marketing person, these are the quotes we should include in our marketing images about the book. But other than that, I don't engage with reviews and I don't look at reviews. And I'm perfectly able to go forth knowing that I did my best. I'm not going to be everything to everybody. If one person didn't like the book, it does not mean I'm a bad writer. But it also does not give me the right to say they have no idea what they're talking about and they should be attacked and deplatformed, which is kind of what Piper did. And because Piper did that, her entire fan base literally just jumps into attack mode anytime anyone has anything negative to say about Piper CJ, which a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about Piper CJ because of how she reacted to a negative review. So it's just an endless vicious cycle, even though Piper has apparently apologized twice and deleted both videos and has said, stop attacking people in my name. It's still happening.
And that raises another interesting hot topic that we can kind of spin into this one is is a artist responsible for their fan base? A lot of blame is getting put onto Piper, and rightfully so, because she's the one who initiated it. Um, and if you do initiate it and then you try to take those steps to recuperate and fix the damage that you've started, is that still on your hands? Like, is this onslaught of um, assaults and degradation coming from these people, is that on Piper's hands still?
So it a lot of things factor into this, and my ultimate answer, which is the very unimpressive and not interesting answer, is the blame falls 50-50 on Piper and her audience. If you are a prolific author and you have an audience primarily made up of people who are 18-year-olds and under. Now, I don't know if that's Piper's audience or if she's primarily adults. But if your audience is made up primarily of minors, they're still trying to figure out how to navigate this world, and they learn how to navigate by example. And if you have a fan base of minors, they look to you for what is an appropriate action to take in any given situation. So if a minor sees that their favorite author is going on the attack and attacking anybody who gives them a bad review, that person is going to think that that's perfectly socially acceptable, which it is not. If your fan base is primarily made up of adults, then it's more 50-50. Adults should know better, but they don't always. And there are any number of reasons for that. There was poor parenting involved. There was poor schooling involved. They have unresolved issues that they need to be taking to therapy and getting medication for, whatever. There are a million things involved. But when you are a person who has a huge following, regardless of how old that following is, you have a responsibility to behave in a way that is mature and correct, because people are watching you.
Right.
Anybody who has seen even one Spider-Man movie knows the saying, with great power comes great responsibility. If you have the power to have that fan base, you have the power to influence all those people, their opinions, and their actions, even if they are adults. So the blame kind of rests 50-50. She should have known better and she should have behaved better.
Yeah.
But so should all of her fans.
Absolutely. And I think that's this thing, like, yeah, she does have some blame to play into this role of people acting out, but at the same time, you know, I'd probably say the majority of them are adults who are acting out and may not be acting the right way. But like you said, if your audience is primarily minors, then they're looking up to you. You're an inspiration for some. I mean, even for adults, you're an inspiration to some people. People are looking up to you and aiming and aspiring to be you. So however you act is how they think that they should act. Um, I mean, the same thing goes for any number of artists and entertainer that people look up to. For example, Will Smith, whenever people looked up to him and they saw him go up and smack Chris Rock across the face for talking about his wife, they came out of the swarms defending Will Smith and saying that, I'd do the same thing, or, and that's just, violence is never the answer, but, and that's both verbal and physical violence, never the answer. Um, but yeah, I think it's a great point. That's a great point. I think you're right. It really is 50-50, and whoever started it, maybe it's 75-25. Whoever started it really is a little more responsible than, say, the target audience, because would the target audience have ever come out of the woodworks like they did to attack this person and these bad reviewers, and if they wouldn't have seen their quote unquote idol do it? So maybe the blame does shift a little bit more to the influencer in that space.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, not everybody has the emotional, mental, and general maturity to handle a huge following of people who will literally go forth, do your bidding, possibly even kill people in your name.
Yeah.
If you get really extreme. One thing I do know, like, I just thought about this. Stephen King is probably one of the most amazing authors of our generation.
Yes.
Even he's not going to please everybody.
Right.
He has to have had at least one-star review in his lifetime. I've never seen him attack anybody who gave him a one-star review. He might have made a snarky comment about them afterwards when it became like a New York Times bestseller, like, how'd that go for you?
Yeah.
And I've never heard his fans jump down somebody's throats when they say, you know what, I'm not a Stephen King fan.
Yeah.
Because I think that's because he's never attacked himself.
He presents himself with a sense of professionalism and grace that is really unprecedented in this industry, or not this industry, but the entertainment influencer industry, because we see it more often than not that some people who are on higher pedestals are doing sometimes worse things than you and I are even doing. I mean, nobody's perfect. We all have our flaws, but it's, you get your flaws pointed out a lot more whenever you're in the spotlight. But somebody like Stephen King, I mean, sure, I'm sure somebody out there could point out a couple flaws, but off the top of my head, I can't think of one that's mainstream. Um, you know, so I think you're right. I think Stephen King is a great example of what all authors should strive to, how they should strive to act.
Exactly. And when a negative review has a very good point, like the review that Piper CJ got, because they left this 2-star review because there were so many editing errors, there was punctuation errors, there was grammar errors, stuff that should not be in a book that has been published and has supposedly been edited. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And that's not a personal attack on your story. That's saying, look, I don't know who you hired for your editor. They dropped the ball on you several times.
Yeah.
And the editor even got pissed off and got in the comments section and tried to start some shit with this reviewer. But it's a good point. There's one, like, even if a reviewer says a whole bunch of crap that is not constructive, doesn't help, kind of just seems to be hating, it still doesn't give you the right to go, I sentence you to death by cancel culture. Go forth, my minions.
Perfect point. So let's shift into our topic for today. Our topic is one that I'm particularly excited about because I know both of us have a little bit different method, but naming rights, like, how do you name your character when you're writing?
Exactly.
So we basically just want to pick each other's brains and see how you, Kelsey, name your characters, how I name my characters, and maybe give our listeners some ideas of how to name their characters. I've got a couple different ways, and I'm sure you do too. So we can, and ways that we know of that other people have told us. We'll pass along all that knowledge so that our listeners can be able to take something away from what we're saying. But we'll start off with you. How do you name your characters?
So it heavily depends on multiple things. What genre am I working in? Is the character based off of somebody I know in real life? Is there an archetype or foreshadowing that I want to do? There are a million different factors. And that's the beauty of it, is nobody has to have the exact same method in naming a character. The only thing is that there are a couple of rules in terms of, like, maybe you shouldn't name your character certain things. A perfect example is I don't think anybody is going to be naming any character in any book they have Adolf for, a couple of 5 centuries.
Yeah, I'd probably avoid that
Whereas,
one.
whereas I can pop up a character, call him Joseph, and people will go, she's either referencing one of the two men from the Bible or she's referencing the dictator from Russia.
Right.
So there are certain names that are ill-advised for many good reasons.
Right.
But again, it depends on multiple things. If you're in a fantasy realm, you can make up names from scratch. There are no rules except for the ones we already talked about.
Yeah, and I kind of use a very similar method to you whenever it comes to if it's a character based off of somebody that I know. Typically, if it's based off of someone that I know, what I do is I'll think of who their celebrity look-alike or who would play them in a movie is and name them after that celebrity's first name. And then last names, I just kind of throw them out there. Most of my books are a Polish centered last name for the main character. So, obviously with Wittkofsky, I like to keep a little bit of Polish heritage in there. So I try to keep that theme going. But yeah, I think that I always tell people that that's how I name characters is by comparing them to who I think their celebrity would be, though, because I'll write these characters and come up with their, like you said, their archetypes and who they are and their personas. And then I think, okay, who would be really good to play them in a Netflix show or a movie or something like that. And then, so for example, in the Seeds of Love, Sunflower Kisses, the main character's stepfather, his name is Matt. And the reason I did that was because I could see Matthew McConaughey playing him. By the way, I love Matthew McConaughey.
All right.
Huge Matthew McConaughey fan. I've got all of his DVDs. So that was also a nice little reason for me to name him Matt. But so that's kind of how I've gotten some of my characters' names. And then there are other instances where I've accidentally mistyped something in a group chat or a conversation with a friend. And I'm like, you know what? That would make a really good name for something. I came up with a name for a short story that was in a Bag of Bones Press anthology. And that name was simply because I had typed in a bunch of letters and accidentally sent a butt message to somebody, and they were like, that would be a great name for something. I'm like, you're right. I'm using it and I'm making it into a name. So it turned out to be a species of aliens that were living underneath Earth that, I'm not going to tell you anymore, but you gotta go read the book. It's Anubis Horribilis, a story of 2022 horror. So by Bag of Bones Press. But yeah, so how have you heard of any other ways that people name their characters that's been intriguing to you?
You mentioned that you like to name characters after the actors that you think would do well in the part, or who your celebrity lookalike is for the character who is based off of someone in your real life. I like to go with, I look up the etymology of the real life person's name, like what culture or ethnicity or race it originate from. And then I try to find another name within that culture, race, ethnicity that I think would be a good fit for the character in the book.
Very nice. Very nice. And like you were saying about the Dungeons and Dragons name generator, there's also other name generators out there where you can put in baby name or a baby name generator, or I think there's even book name generators where you can come up with names for your characters for a book and you just type in a little bit about them and it spits out a couple of names. So there are many resources out there like that, but your naming rights comes from you. Ultimately, you are the
Mm-hmm.
one who knows these characters best, Um, have you ever had someone come to you and say that a character's name needs to be changed in a book?
No, I've never had somebody else come to me to say that. I have chosen to say this character's name needs to be changed after a certain point in the writing process.
Okay.
And that's simply because sometimes you just find a placeholder name that works for a while, and then all of a sudden you hear the name that actually works and is correct. I'm surprised that I haven't had people come to me and say you need to change this character, considering that the one and only time I don't ever change the name of a character who is based off of a real life person is because somebody fucked up. And henceforth and forever, certain assholes in my books will always be known as David.
Yes. And it's funny that you say that because I wrote a poem in Coffee, Alcohol, and Heartbreak, and it was titled Fall in Love with a Writer. And basically, it's saying that if you fall in love with a writer and they fall in love with you, your name will be immortalized in history. But I guess the opposite also applies. If you scorn a writer, your name will also be immortalized in history, but for a whole different reason.
Oh, yeah. I have lived my life by the statement never wrong a writer, they get their revenge in print.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So, yes, you can name people in your book off of real life people if you're trying to make a point. I'm comfortable doing it with the person in question because how many Davids are there in the world? Good luck finding the one that I'm actually trying to take a knife to.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. So I guess kind of shifting gears a little bit from naming characters to naming books. How do you come up with the names for your books?
I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell. I genuinely mean this. Titles are sometimes one of the easiest things for me to come up with because they just click from a moment's notice. I can't even work out my own brain chemistry to know, like, how do we get from here to here?
So before or after you finish the manuscript?
Usually before I finish the manuscript. Usually once I have the idea for the story and, like, the main character, that's when a title will pop up. The one exception to that has been my first book, Starforged Orion, because that went through several incarnations. Initially, it was just going to be one book. Then I decided to turn it into a series, and my original name for the series was already taken, so I had to change that. And I came up with Starforged because what I was getting at was, the statement that somebody has been forged in fire.
Yes.
They've been made under very difficult circumstances. I took that a step further, like they were forged in the heart of a star, which is somewhere in like the kelvins in terms of how hot it is.
Right.
So that was the point I was trying to make with the title of the series. And then Orion is just the constellation that gets focused on in the book.
I think for me, I've always come up with the names either kind of like you before I ever wrote the book or during the plotting phase once I became a plotter.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this briefly on the last podcast, but Not Alone came to me one day while I was driving. And it just kind of, and I think a lot of writers have that same epiphany moment where you just kind of get the idea for the name of the book. We've got a book that we're getting ready to publish coming out in March, that is going through an entire rework. We're renaming it, we're redoing the storyline, and basically printing out it was a self-published book before, and now we're redoing it to make it basically a second edition new book. So that to me is even harder than actually naming a book, because I'm now having to read through this book to come up with a name for it, because I haven't plotted it, I haven't pantsed it, I didn't write it. Now I'm naming somebody else's book, obviously with in conjunction with our chief editor, Victoria, and the author, Naya. But it's still a struggle because you have to come up with a name for somebody else. It's like naming somebody else's baby.
Mm-hmm.
I almost don't want to, it feels sacrilegious, but I have to do it. We have to do it. I'm not going to put that all on the author because,
Yeah,
we're in this together. And that's what we do as a publishing company is we help support our authors in every step of the publication process and make
exactly.
sure that they have the most successful publication possible. So, I couldn't imagine writing my own book and completely finishing it and without a name. Um, that to me is just tough because I think the name, and a lot of people, me included, love when the name of the book is included in the book. I am a sucker for that. Movies, TV shows, I'm a sucker for it. I love it, love it, love it. Do you hate it or do you love it? Because that everybody's always split on that.
I also love it. I love that moment of, oh, he said it, he said
Yeah,
it, he said it.
yes, exactly. Oh man, it's such a good moment. It's like a ooh, thanks, author. You were thinking about me whenever you did that.
So I have to tell this story because you're gonna love this. I think I've told you this story before, but it works for the podcast. Obviously, I recently published my first murder mystery, Permanent Reminders. And that is the story of a tattoo artist in New York who kind of becomes an amateur detective. And I was struggling to find a title for that one too. For a while, I was working with canvas, which is what, tattoo artists call skin, because that is their canvas. But it was kind of a vague title. It doesn't really give you an idea of what the story is about. And then I remembered. So my dad is one of those old school dudes who does not want his daughters to ever get tattoos in their lives. He has made every single argument as to why we shouldn't. And the one thing he goes back to is he will always quote this one Jimmy Buffett song that says that says tattoos are a permanent reminder of a temporary feeling. And that's how I found Permanent Reminders.
I like that a lot, though. I like that, and I think whenever you had that epiphany where you were like, "Ooh, this is gonna be the name of my book," describe that feeling.
It is literally just electricity when you get that moment. And what I absolutely loved about finding that moment is when I looked up more quotes about tattoos so that I could try to find titles for the rest of the books in the series, at least, a couple of them had the word permanent in them. So I could keep this idea going forward, this through line. And
Right.
that was just, better than goddamn sex, I'm telling you.
I believe it. I mean, I felt the same way whenever I came up with the Sunflower Kisses series, because I knew I wanted to do sunflowers because my wife Gracie, her favorite flower is a sunflower.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our wedding flower. So I knew, and this is kind of the Sunflower Kisses is my dedication to her. Um, and so I wanted to take that concept of flowers and relate that to love and how, I'm not going to give away the name for the whole series, but book one is the seeds of love. Book two is love and growth.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's following the stages of a plant's life, kind of like how you would follow, and it'll all wrap up and make sense where this is coming to in book five at the very end. Um, I need to write that down so that I don't forget it because I just had a brilliant idea. Isn't that how writers work? We're in the middle of something where we can't write it down and we have the brilliant idea.
Exactly. I cannot tell you how many little epiphanies have come forward because I'm working on another project, just talking to myself, and all of a sudden I say something and I go, where did that come from?
I think it's it's funny because we were not picking on, but we were poking at, that's the right word. I was poking at some of our authors the other day, Jesse Sadler and Natalie Bartley, to try to get them to work on and finish book twos of their series. And also Caitlin. I've been poking at Caitlin quite a bit too. Don't worry, Kelsey, your time's coming for the Jazz Daily Mystery. Don't worry, it's coming. And then, I'm sitting there poking at everybody, and I got to thinking, I'm like, I've got book one of a 5-book series written, half of book two. I've been stalled on book two. I started another project, and I've got another side project going with Kelsey. I was like, I'm one to be talking about finishing your series. I can't even finish my series.
But that's the deal with being an author. How many memes have we seen where it's like, here's this unfinished project that you started 5 months ago. Ooh, shiny new idea.
That's because the naming is the fun part for me. Naming the characters, naming the books and the series. That's the fun part to me. And then the writing, I mean, that's fun too, but it's not as fun.
It's also the part where you're like, oh God, why do I have?
Yeah. Or I'm sitting there be like, oh God, why are you doing this? Like with that look on my face of just absolute disgust at my own work. That's imposter syndrome. That's a topic for another day, though.
Oh yeah,
Another podcast.
And we will unpack that because it is sadly a constant in the world of artists.
Yes. And like we said last week, we've already got week two or season two scheduled out. So imposter syndrome, if you want to hear that, you got to keep listening to season two. So I think you're gonna like the podcast. So if you like the podcast so far, you're gonna like it all the way to season two. So, but Kelsey, do you have any final thoughts about naming your characters or naming your books or anything naming related?
Naming your characters, like naming your baby, is always kind of an ordeal. The best part about naming your characters over naming your baby is 9 times out of 10, you don't need to get the other person's opinion involved because it's usually just you.
Yeah. That, and you can change your characters' names after they're not after they're published, but I guess the manuscript is kind of like, okay, this is going to sound terrible and not a great comparison at all. The manuscript part is kind of like being pregnant part, where you're growing the baby and you have plenty of time to name it, but after it's born or after it's published, then you're too late. So I like that. I like it.
I've made a very similar similar analogy. When I published my first book, somebody asked me, how does it feel? And I said, it feels like I've been in labor for 6 years and I just popped out an 18-year-old who's going to college.
Nice.
And they were like, is that a good thing? I don't know.
Oh, all right. Well, this podcast has been fun. Naming is always a good time. I love telling my celebrity story, because I think a lot of people may not think about it like that, but shit, shoot for the stars.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Imagine your book as a Netflix series or a Amazon Prime exclusive movie. Imagine it like that and say, you know what, this is who would play it, because everybody loves the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air because Will Smith's name is Will Smith. So who wouldn't love Matthew McConaughey playing a character named Matthew?
Exactly.
Everybody would love it. It's a win-win. So that way, if you ever do get famous and your story gets turned into a movie, TV series, whatever, you get to say, I did that. I knew that person was going to play that role.
Actually, I did just think of one other thing, one last little other idea for people. I am a big fan of Iyanla Vanzant, who is very much of a spiritual worker, a therapist, a counselor, who often worked for Oprah, had her own show for a very long time dealing with trauma. And she would always say, and I'm going to butcher this, but she would say something like, when people call your name, they're reminding your soul of who they are. So when naming your character, name them something to remind their soul of who they are and what role they play in the story.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good note to end the podcast on. Beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, Kelsey, it's been fun.
It's been a pleasure as always.
As always. So until next Friday, or no, Friday after next. I get my movies. I get my movies confused. Friday. So Friday after next, you'll get episode 3 of season 1. So until then, we'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
And to the Cook the Books podcast by Tea with Coffee Media. Interested in supporting this podcast and our independent press?
Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok to stay updated with all the latest Tea with Coffee Media updates.
You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter by visiting teawithcoffee.media.
Finally, visit our Patreon to get early access to the Cook the Books podcast, free access to all Tea with Coffee Media ebooks, and the chance to win cool prizes.
You've been listening to the Cook the Book podcast with me, Tyler Wittkofsky.
And me, Kelsey Ann Lovelady. Until next
time.